Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach, and up next, answers to listener questions about workout intensity, changing a season's plans, and more. And after that, World of Running updates, including Berlin Marathon and the new world record. This is it, the end of month Q&A episode, meaning we answer your questions, and they are great questions. Yeah. It's going to be an exciting time talking about the things on your mind. However, if you missed the chance to get on this episode, we do it every month. And so what you need to do to answer, to rather ask a question, is go to atozrunning.com/question. And then you can submit one there. You can also submit questions certainly anywhere that you find us and interact with us. But it's easiest if you do so there, because then it goes directly to the spot where our questions go. Otherwise, hopefully we remember to put it in the right spot if it's somewhere else.
The thing that's special about this Q&A episode is that it's the last one of our third year of the podcast.
No, it's the last episode, period.
Of the third year. We're going to continue to do it as long as you guys keep listening. So keep it up, right?
I mean, even if you stop listening, we're probably going to just keep doing it, because, how would we even know whether you're listening or not?
That's true. We just love it. We love running that much. We'll keep doing it no matter what.
All right.
We love to connect with you, and we posted the lunge matrix this week, and it was in reference to a podcast episode about preparation for the marathon a couple weeks back. And Slower Pastor, that's his handle, said, I do the lunge matrix every morning, presses, curls, and lunges, frontal, lateral, and sagittal movements. Very good for dynamic stretching. So
that's quite a precise description of the lunge matrix.
Affirming his desire to do the routine too. So I'm challenging all of you, just start simple. Do the lunge matrix and leg swings before every run. Do it for a week. Do it continuously after that, of course, but I want to challenge you to try to do it consistently for a week before your runs.
And remember that it takes 2 to 4 weeks for strength building exercises to really pay off. And so you do it for that week to create the habit, then do it for another, and you'll start noticing benefits.
Absolutely.
Better still. Well, let's get on to your questions in the main topic. Some great questions from all of you today. Not that questions in the past weren't great, but we're excited to talk about them here right now. So let's start with a question from Ireland, from Cathal. Overseas question.
We love to get questions from all over, so it's fun to hear from a viewer that is all the way in Ireland.
True that. So here's the question. I'm going to read it for you because the context matters immensely. I'm a 50-year-old marathoner in Ireland who is usually nursing a niggle and straddling the injury line. Sorry to hear that. And yes, aren't we all? She writes, and yes, that is very likely true. Just wondering your thoughts on cross-training, specifically the elliptical. A lot of the top UK runners seem to be embracing it more and more, like Charlotte Purdue, the English marathoner, or Scottish, but she runs for Great Britain, marathoner, did all of her second efforts on her double days on the elliptical prior to her PR at the London Marathon last year. If you're not familiar with Charlotte Purdue, she's very fast.
She's very fast, yes.
Also, what are your thoughts on using it for intensity, elliptical for intensity? I normally do 1 session a week and do some marathon, half marathon pace intervals in my long run, typically 4x 4x4K, things like that. I'm often nervous doing fast work again 3 to 4 days later, and so I'm wondering on the effectiveness of doing threshold work as a substitute for midweek faster running, or even like every other week or alternate weeks or things. Okay, that's the question.
Great question.
There was a follow-up, by the way, and so we exchanged a couple of emails, and there's an additional kind of follow-up question, and we'll get to that here in a moment because it's a kind of a slight offshoot. So first, great question. Thanks for asking, and thanks for all of the details, because that's what makes it a valuable interaction here. So we have the context. First, in your situation, based off of your description, clearly health is potentially a concern because you're often nursing the prospect of an injury or possibility of an injury. Now, as you noted, that is very common for runners. If you're tipping over the injury line frequently, that's a big deal. If you're just noticing like the aches and pains that kind of linger for a few days and that's pretty constant, but then they go away and you're able to continue to train, that kind of thing, we're not too worried about. But if you're tipping over the injury line, or if you've got some kind of chronic problem that's continually coming back, that's a problem. So the first thing that I will say is we would wonder about the source of those potential consistent niggles and or injuries.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that. But as far as cross training, yes, cross training is, and an elliptical especially because it's a little bit more neuromuscularly similar to running. It is a valuable asset for when you're hurt or you need to supplement or rather replace your training in running. So if you can't run, elliptical is a great alternative if you can do it. If it's not,
depending on your niggle.
Yeah, depending on the injury, it can in fact be another problem. But so that can be a great option. Always a good choice if you're just trying to add some more volume to your training load, but you're concerned about staying healthy if you do so. Things like cross training to add volume. If you've got the time in the day, add as much of that as you can do so healthily. And elliptical is a good one for that because it's zero impact. Any of those zero impact types of exercises can be very beneficial for supplement. However, there's a major concern when you try to start replacing substantial amounts of your running with zero impact training. And the major concern is simply this: it's reducing the musculoskeletal stimulus, because that's why it's easier to do when you're hurt or, to stay healthy. And because it's reducing that stimulus, it is potentially handicapping your ability to train healthily. So it can make you more likely to be injured if you're not able to run regularly on hard ground. It can increase the likelihood of potential future injury because you're not getting as strong then. So let's say you do a lot of elliptical cross training and then you want to spend a month doing some regular training as you're gearing up for a race. You're more likely to get hurt during that time if your body's not used to regularly running, for instance. However, it's also, there's another kind of an aside there, which is that you're also getting a different kind of training stimulus. And so if your comment here is, I'm healthy and fine, I'm training fine, but I'm just curious about maybe doing more on the elliptical instead of running would help me be even fitter or faster. The answer is no, it would not. It's quite the opposite. It is a less effective training stimulus than running. So you have to weigh your current health condition against your training goals and decide from that perspective whether it would be the right choice. So that's the blanket assumption with cross training. Good if you need it because you're hurt. Not good if you're doing it instead of running just because, but you're healthy and you could handle more running.
If you are wanting to build cycle on cycle, let's say you're doing like an in-between phase that you want to be able to maintain and grow your fitness, but you want less on your load, like less altogether, then and you just need it as a mental break from running. I think that that's also an appropriate use of cross training to maintain some of your fitness. But it's like Zach is saying, you're going to be missing out on the musculoskeletal if you're looking at something like the marathon, and you are a marathoner. So we have to consider all these things. But I did want to mention that, it is helpful at times to do your zero impact or like choose something else besides running. But during a marathon build would not be the ideal time.
Right. Then the additional layer of what about using cross training for intensity? And the question came from, you don't feel like you can handle intense work too often, like you're not sure that your legs or your body's ready for it 3 or 4 days later. And so you're thinking about maybe doing one of your intense workouts on the elliptical. So 2 things. First, it's substantially less effective training purposes for intensity. It's closer to running at an easy effort, just kind of a general aerobic kind of standpoint. Significantly less so if you're trying to make it add to intensity, because now you're talking about the level of muscle recruitment, and the degree of and location of muscle recruitment is very different with the cross training. And so the nature of the intensity is both energy system wise less effective, because you can't get quite as intense of an effort on an elliptical as you can running as easily. And also, it's changing completely the muscle recruitment factors that are benefiting you by an intense running workout. So considering that, I would never use cross training for intensity unless you cannot run and you're injured, and then all you're doing is cross training. Then you look for ways to add to some of that. But here's the question that we have that comes up as soon as you ask that question. It raised a flag of concern, and here it is. You said that in the question that you cannot run or don't feel necessarily like you're ready to run an intense workout 3 to 4 days later after your long run workout. And that's a red flag, because you should never need that much time to recover from a hard effort before you're ready to go hard again. If you do, you're overdoing the hard effort no matter what type of hard effort it is. 3 to 4 days to recover. If you're well conditioned, you would never need that much time. We're even talking like you should be able to recover from full race efforts up to anything short of a marathon in 3 to 4 days. So that is too hard for your long run workout. And that's okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, or there is something else going on medically that would be prohibiting you from recovering properly.
In both cases, you're going too hard in the workout, and maybe you should be able to go that hard if there was something, like a medical condition situation, not enough sleep, not enough hydration, all that kind of stuff. That might be delaying that recovery further too. But whatever the case may be, if you take 3 to 4 days to recover from something, that's a problem. So you want to address that first, because that's probably going to solve your problem of feeling like you need to do something different during the week. And then on the other side of it, knowing that the elliptical has its place, but it's not going to be a tool that I use instead of running unless I must for health. Now we get into some interesting things with a follow-up question that you had asked, just a quick comment there that was adding to some of our concern here. So you ask, Cathal asks, one other small question. Do you recommend super shoes on or off long runs, tempo or speed work, any of that kind of stuff? If the goal marathon pace is blank, would you recommend my marathon pace efforts be slower, if not in super shoes? And this raises for us some clarity about some of your other questions. So you're probably training based off paces, I'm guessing, because at this point you've mentioned marathon pace a couple of times. You've mentioned lactate threshold, heart rate efforts a couple of times. So my concern here now is the likelihood that the way you're training is producing too much recovery time or too much stress to your system, potentially. And so if you're training long runs at marathon paces, I'm not even going to address the super shoe question first, because the point here is marathon pace work in a long run is almost definitely one of two things. Either it's too slow or too fast for almost every runner. And it doesn't really matter. You can be the best runner in the world, Elliot Kipchoge, for instance, who set the world record recently, and training on a specific pace in a given run is a surefire way to say, no matter how my body is handling that today, I'm going to do something it shouldn't be doing in the moment. Because if you're training by effort, then you're doing the right amount of effort for the day. So that's a concern here, because you're mentioning that you're struggling with niggles and potential injuries quite a bit. You're noting that you're not feeling good enough to do hard efforts more than once or so a week. And then mentioning some of these other pace-related things has me wondering if you're not riding that balance too far over the edge. Sometimes, not always. So that's the way we're going to respond to the question here. Now, as far as the super shoes go, yes, it's beneficial to wear them from time to time, but only, in my opinion, only ever need to wear our racing shoes when we're preparing for a race, and we need to make sure our body is conditioned to handle that difference in footwear. So I would not ever wear the super shoes in training unless I'm like getting ready for a race, in which case about once a week for 6 weeks or so is plenty of time. Twice a week for 3 or 4 weeks, also plenty of time.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I may have mentioned this on the show before, but Des Linden had responded to a post about super shoes and this exact question of doing them in workouts. And she said, well, you're reducing your adaptations. So you might be recovering faster, but you're not getting as much from it. So that is a consideration also when we look at our training. And I appreciate that Des Linden, the queen of the Boston Marathon herself.
Well, I mean, she got that from us. She was listening to our podcast when we said that years ago when the super shoes were first coming out. So
we have said that before, but I feel like the social proof, the evidence through other runners, and being able to be in. We're affirming
each other, because
affirming each other,
we're all pursuing the same goals here.
Exactly.
And yes, so don't use your super shoes in your day-to-day training dynamics. Don't look for an opportunity to wear them regularly unless you're gearing up for a race, in which case you want to make sure that your body's familiar with the shoe.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There's a lot more we could say about things like pace training and heart rate training. But the point here is we want to try to answer that question specifically. And I think we said even more than we needed to answer the question. But
those were great questions, Cathal. Like, really appreciate you writing this all out. It was super thoughtful. She wrote through a lot of the details, and we love to see those kind of details because we feel like we can give you a better explanation. We can answer the question more thoroughly when you do. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And thanks for listening from Ireland.
And sometimes we'll give you suggestions that aren't even answers to your question. It may not be suggestions you wanted, but that's what we had to say. Now let's move on to a question from Pete in Michigan. And this one related to a recent episode, we were discussing disruptions in training and how to deal with those things. And so Pete is addressing that also in connection to our recent conversations about marathons, which if you haven't listened to any of those episodes, it's a good collection there. A good 3 episodes in a row that were solid. All right. So the question is, so when you are coming back from an injury and the original goal race is coming up soon, when and or how do you make the call to defer or not run the race? Okay.
This is a very, very hard decision.
Well, it's a frustrating decision, but it's
Yeah.
actually a fairly easy one in terms of the details. It's just not, it's unpleasant. That's going to be the case always with these kinds of things.
I'm sorry, Pete.
Yes, and we've all been there. We've all been there where the goal's coming up and something goes wrong and we're hurt, we're sick for 2 weeks, all this kind of stuff. And so what do we do about that? The main thing is if you are gearing up for a marathon, then the decision is one thing. If it's anything shorter than that, the decision is much different. So I'll give you both of them because Pete's gearing up for a marathon in the question here. So Pete, you got about 6 weeks to be able to say, if I have 6 weeks that I can train, and in those 6 weeks before the marathon, I can build up my long runs to 2 to 3 hours, preferably closer to 3 hours, possibly, healthily. So if you can run 3 hours healthily for a couple of weeks prior to a marathon, then go ahead and race it. You're not necessarily going to race it at your best possible performance or things like that, but your body can handle it if you're able to run a couple 3-hour long runs, or not necessarily even 2.5-hour long runs. If you can do those for a couple of weeks and it's not causing you problems, it's not hurting you, then I say that's my green light to say I can still do the marathon. I'm going to do it at an easy effort if I'm not healthy fully soon enough. If I haven't been able to train at a high capacity, I'm not going to go out there and try to run my PR pace or something, but I can still run it. If you get within 6 weeks of the race and you're still not able to train yet, the injury is still nagging, or your return to running protocol is not starting yet, then you're within that window of, I would recommend a deferral at that point. And largely because you probably could survive a marathon coming off of almost no training, if not no training, and you probably could do so without re-injuring the injury itself.
Depending what that is.
Depending on what it is. But the likelihood of causing problems is so much higher if you can't get enough of a training stimulus to have some leg strength and musculoskeletal structural stuff. So that's it. Now, for shorter races, you do not need that because for shorter races, you can get away with jogging the entire time. And if it's not super long like a marathon and beyond, then jogging for a couple hours is rarely ever going to hurt someone who's totally healthy. So if you're getting ready for a race and you have a disruption and you're able to run again, you're healthy, there's no concerns or problems, and you've got a week or two before that race, still do it, but just, do it easy. Or if you want to really, go for it and you don't want to do it this year, then defer it to another year because you're not going to go hard on a race if you've only been training for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I agree. I don't have much more to add to that.
Well, here's a question from Becky in Georgia, or Becky from Georgia. And the question here, once again, is a very precise one. And I appreciate this because this is what helps us provide the kinds of answers that are practical. So you've challenged me, Becky writes, to try to build my musculoskeletal system and run aerobically prior to jumping into spring marathon training. That's great, Becky. We're glad that we challenged you. The challenge I'm finding, however, is that I run a hilly route and I can't, or lots of hilly routes, and I can't make it up many of the hills without crossing heart rate zones, clearly hearing labored breathing, that kind of thing, because they're substantial hills. Mm-hmm. Even at a walk, they're still legit, she writes. So 20 years of running experience tells me that hills are important, and I don't want to avoid them completely on my base training. How would you suggest navigating the challenge?
Well, I have run one race, the Olympic Trials Marathon in Atlanta, Georgia, and I can tell you it was very hilly.
And we don't even know what part of Georgia you're talking about, but there's a lot of hills around there.
There's a lot of hills in Georgia, and I think immediately I go to like some of my own challenges, and pushing a double, even in Michigan, which is definitely not as hilly as in Georgia, but pushing the double jogger with my boys up a hill, I'm like, it can't be a true easy run.
There's no way to go easy and still move up.
I know, and I'm like, even if I'm walking, like I'm not super easy. It's just like so hard to push my boys up a hill. So I can relate, Becky. It can be challenging to not run too hard when you have hills in your everyday route.
So your intuition is good, Becky, because you're right. You do have an inevitability there, and you don't necessarily want to avoid it because hills are a good thing. They are going to help build your leg strength, that musculoskeletal thing we were talking about. But there's two layers here. The first is you don't want to do hills too frequently when you're in base building, when you're just first getting things built up, simply because it just makes it a little bit harder to build the volume and load when you're doing hills too often. Now, if you live on a mountain and all you've done your whole life is go up and down hills, it's not going to matter, because your body's so adapted to it that it's not going to make a difference. So Becky, you said, 20 years.
Heart rate wise.
We'll get there. 20 years of running on all these hills, and you're like, yeah, I've been doing this, forever. So if you really just run hills constantly all the time, then you have less to worry about than people like me, because I run like in the winter on a treadmill most of the time where it's totally flat. And so I have to be careful about hills when I'm building things up. So there's a contrast there that's important. I'm assuming you are more adapted to hills in general because of the description here. So yes, now the question is, but my heart rate's going up and the effort is higher just to get over the hill. And so in that sense, there's a degree of unavoidableness about that. And you have to keep that in mind here. So I'm going to try to go as easy as I can, reasonably enough. So I don't necessarily want to stop and just walk to get up the hill with an easy effort. But even if you were walking it, your heart rate's still going to be higher. So you just slow down as reasonably as you can to get to that point where you're getting up the hill still, but you're not straining to try to do it. And if it's a little bit higher heart rate, if your effort spikes a little bit as you're trying to climb it, that's just going to happen.
Yes, yeah.
However, never forget that effort is the goal, not pace. So not knowing if this is in fact the way you're doing it already, but if I'm going up that hill, I am definitely going to slow down. Every time you go up a hill and you're trying to run a given effort, you are going to slow down, race or training run or otherwise. And the assumption here is that's okay, because the uphill has to slow me down unless I want to increase my effort substantially. In some instances, of course, when we're talking race strategy, there may be times when you do want to increase effort.
Attack the hill.
That's not what we're talking about here.
Everyone's heard a cross-country coach yell, attack the hill.
Yeah, in a 5K, in a short race, there's a time when you're going to need to do that. Anyway, so yes, that's the key here. So you're going to slow down, but how much do you slow down depends on how much space you have to slow down, before you're just walking. And so when I go up hills and I'm trying to do like a jog and it's a substantial hill, I'm really going slow. Like I might see a 2 minute per mile decrease in pace on those hills. That is inevitable. If it's a lighter weight hill, not quite a bit less than that. So hopefully that does it. Hopefully that answers your question.
What do you think though, Zach, about like, I usually coming off a hill, if I'm trying to maintain, it's supposed to be an easy day. After coming off the hill, I stay running really slow for a little bit until my heart rate goes down. Oh yeah,
no, that's true.
Okay.
You need your heart rate to recover very quickly.
Yes.
If it doesn't, it means you're continuing to go too hard, which is actually another strange thing that runners tend to do with hills is after they get over the hill, because their effort was higher going up the hill, they tend to, so momentum matters for running immensely, in fact. And so when we build a momentum, like we sustain a decent effort for a while, we are prone to want to sustain that effort longer and continue to do so until we can't anymore. And so you have to fight against that momentum. You get over the hill and you have to almost deliberately, cut back on the effort there.
And depending on where you are in your cycle, if you're continuing to have the, you're not in like the full musculoskeletal phase, but you're beyond that and you have workouts that are in your schedule, I have, because of the double jogger situation, had to drive somewhere where I didn't have massive hills because I have a workout the next day and I had one the day before, and it truly needs to be easy for me. And I'll drive someplace if I need to have my double jogger so that I'm not faced with that. So that's another, I guess, a solution that could be had. And like you said, we don't want to avoid them, but it would be better to put that in a steady state run. Better to do your hilly day with there's a steady effort involved than on your true easy day.
Becky's thinking that she has to drive to the Everglades before she finds a flat enough ground.
Or come to Michigan. Come visit us in Michigan.
It's a little bit shorter to the Everglades than to
for
Michigan.
her, yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question, partly because there's actually a connection here in terms of that conversation about momentum and maintaining efforts. So this question is from Paul in Michigan, and Paul asked this one on YouTube in a YouTube comment, which is great.
YouTube.
Shout out to the YouTube watchers, or I guess listeners sometimes, but just listening on YouTube. Okay, so the question is two parts here because we had a little bit of a back and forth and more substance came as we did. So Paul asked, when you talk about musculoskeletal training at an easy effort, so once again, that comes up, and in this instance, for long runs, being able to run 2:30 runs at an easy effort, is it zone 2 or zone 3 running or both? What? Zone? What are you talking about, Paul?
Zach does know what you're talking about.
I have continually been confused by easy because, here we go, yeah. So easy, what feels easy ends up being like zone 3, but Garmin says zone 3 is aerobic, which for some reason aerobic and easy are two different things for Garmin. But in Paul's instance here, to run easy enough for the Garmin heart rate zone to be zone 2 or under feels unproductive, is the comment. Okay. So there's the first question. What do I do about this easy effort for long runs? But then the second question, he went back and mined some of our old posts on some of our articles and found one that was relevant here that was about running with rhythm and trying to maintain rhythm. So we were talking earlier about momentum. So that one was about running with rhythm. And found it helpful because in trying to just kind of maintain a steady rhythm instead of focusing just on effort and what the heart rate thing was saying, then the run was quite a bit more consistent, which is interesting, and experienced cardiac drift as expected, but didn't really worry too much about it because it was just trying to maintain kind of that same consistent effort, or rather rhythm. So that's the twofold side of the question. Now, the question became, should I just ignore the heart rate zone stuff and just run what feels kind of like consistent and easy and maintain that rhythm for the whole time and not really worry too much about the heart rate zones? Between both of these questions, that was the ultimate question about it. So we've got a number of comments here for you, Paul, and there's a kind of a little bit of a back and forth because we have to define a few things too. So easy efforts, highly relative term. Clearly, Garmin uses easy to like basically call something worthless. That's what Garmin's term easy is for, because if it's not aerobic, then what good is it doing you, right, as a runner? Well, of course it's doing you good.
Yes.
So we'll come back to that. But I disagree with Garmin's actual definition of easy too, simply because of the way the zones work is kind of confusing. But so in terms of the comment about unproductive, let's start there. We do not believe that any runs are unproductive if you are running.
Unless you are injured. Then
then it's counterproductive.
Then it's
worse.
counterproductive.
Thank you. So no runs are unproductive, though, in terms of like it's too easy to be productive, because we have to understand the point of the run and what it's doing for us. And so if you have three aspects to your training that you're building, any kind of run is contributing positively to musculoskeletal development. Now, what unproductive means from Garmin's perspective and how they use it is they're basically saying, based on your current degree of fitness, if you don't train to a certain degree within a given period of time, then your fitness is going to start sliding backwards. Now, that is true in theory, but that is not the way we approach long runs, and we'll come back to that a little bit. But so your comment about unproductive, it feels unproductive. Let's keep that in a bookmark here for a moment. Go back to defining easy now. So 50 to 70% of maximum effort is easy. There's a large range of ways people define that differently than other things. But if I were to go out and I were to run 10 miles at my maximum effort, take 50% of that effort, and that's easy. But effort is not a strictly objective measure here. And we do not use heart rate reserve and max heart rate to calculate a kind of effort path, because we don't use heart rate to define our efforts. Heart rate is telling me what my body's doing, and internally, I should be trying to build my intuition about that effort, not trusting my watch and whatever number it's reflecting back at me to say what the effort is. So the first thing you're doing, Paul, is you're trying to build a more kind of just intuitive approach to the run, and we like that. That's great.
Yeah.
And we don't mind things like ignoring heart rate zones and stuff like that.
Don't mind it.
We don't mind it.
Preach that.
I intentionally ignore heart rate zones. Matter of fact, I haven't had a heart rate turned on my watch in years. But the point is that while that is the one side, yes, feel free to ignore the heart rate stuff and try to instead find the right kind of effort balance. The other side of this is, however, you are trying to approach your run to say, I need a certain degree of effort to feel like it was productive. So you need to be running hard enough to feel like it's productive. However, for a long run, in different phases of training, it serves different purposes. So if you're doing a long run in like a base building phase of training or conditioning work phase of training, then I'm going to tell you, make that long run less productive. Intentionally keep it easier, because you're supposed to be getting your harder efforts from other things, ideally, simply because they're more efficient for building fitness. And so you get your harder efforts from other things like the day before and after. Then the long run itself is an easy day. If the long run's an easy day, then our comments about easy efforts and keeping that at a low effort apply here, and you should probably be slowing it down based off of what your watch data is telling you. You're running fairly hard effort, and so you should probably be slowing that down. Don't slow it down and watch the effort on the watch. Slow it down based off how you're feeling to get to the point where it feels like it's an effortless run. You can run easy breezy. That's what we're trying to describe in that episode. Run easy breezy for all that time, that long run, and have no problem finishing 2.5 hours without even feeling like you're hardly doing anything. That's great, because once you can do that, then you're starting to build what might prepare you then for the next step, which is then there is a time for long runs themselves to be a harder effort if you're training for long races. If you're not training for long races, then it's a totally different approach to things. But long races, I would say like half marathon and marathon, especially marathon, but sometimes half marathon. And so then we would start to talk about, okay, there is a kind of approach to the long run that we're going to look for that is more of a hard effort. And the final comment here, and this goes back to then that whole the rhythm piece of things. And that is when you are building fitness, your paces will naturally start to accelerate if, and this is such an important if your structural resilience, your musculoskeletal strength is built up well. If your musculoskeletal strength is not built up well and you're running too hard, you don't adapt as well to the training. And so if you didn't spend the time, Paul, running your easy long runs at a very easy effort to the point where you said, it might feel almost unproductive. If you didn't do that for a time first and you just were running hard long runs all the time, then you're running a high risk of, one, less training adaptation, because your system is not quite as strong yet, and when you're first starting to do that, and two, it's a higher chance of injury, and especially for long runs, because what a long run does is it causes problems at a cellular level also if the effort's too high and your body's not able to handle that. So all of this aside, that's a loaded question because there's a lot of layers involved. But Paul, my two responses to you are simply this. Go ahead and ignore those heart rate zones. We don't care anything about those if you're getting the effort right. And then on the other side of that, don't think that your long run should be itself a workout until you have been able to build up for a substantial period of time.
Because I need to balance Zach out. Heart rate can help you learn
Oh,
effort.
yeah, that's true.
So
I would deny it.
Yeah, exactly. Because there will be a time that you're not really sure, and it can be helpful to have your heart rate, have the data to tell you whether or not your perceived effort might be correct. But then from there, we want to build our intuition, because a lot of the data that we get from our watches is not entirely accurate. So we want to make sure that we are able to be intuitive runners and not be relying on external feedback in order to figure out how to run our training, but also we're looking towards our races. We want to be able to do that in races.
Yeah, keep in mind the irony of this, of using something like a heart rate monitor to tell me my effort. So remember that effort is an input. That's how hard you are attempting to do something, okay? Heart rate is an internal function that's happening inside your body. And all the monitor is doing is it's trying to listen to your heart rate and tell you what it is. And then they've developed some fancy technologies like the zones and stuff to basically tell you if it's too high or too low. But remember, everything that's happening there, minus the watch, is already happening internally. It's your body function based off of what you're doing. You are in control of that. Your watch does not have to tell you what your heart rate's saying. You can feel it because it's beating inside your own body. So learn how to feel your heart. Now, yes, Andy is exactly right. And this is something that's happened numerous times with our own athletes whom we coach, where something like I'm having a really hard time getting my runs easy enough, or I'll just be watching athletes' results on their training log stuff, and it's like your paces are substantially faster than what we've talked about as kind of like easy. And so then the runner's like, well, I am running easy. And I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus here. I'm not saying that can't be true. However, let's put a heart rate monitor on that runner for 2 weeks and say you may not exceed for a period of time. And what we tend to find out is, oh, that was quite a bit easier than what I thought I was doing.
So he's trying not to throw me under the bus, but I'm here on the show, so I'll be the one to admit that this has actually happened with us, where I was like, oh, it's easy to run this. And then when we put the heart rate monitor on, I had
not easy enough.
Yeah, my perceived effort, and also perceived effort when when running with others. So I had to figure that out as well, and where my heart rate when I was running with other people, because I would just feel like it was so easy breezy, but I'd be working harder than I should.
Yes. Effort relative to my mood, effort relative to my social experience. What we have to do is we have to develop our intuition about the internal measures of our effort as best as we can, because those things can be very challenging. Okay. Well, we've answered all your questions. And now that we've solved every single problem that any one of you had, and how do we know this? Because no one else asked a question within the period of time to get it on this episode. So for that period of time, we answered every question and a couple of others that were just comments on emails and stuff. So your problems are solved. And if you want more problems solved next time around, ask more questions, and we'll do this again at the end of the next month.
Mm-hmm. Now on to the world of running.
Quick updates for you about A2Z runners.
Shoutouts.
Andrew, running a half marathon, ran a PR, dropped like a minute on a PR. That's good stuff. That does not happen easily.
And it was fast. Like he was moving.
He's moving. And that's attested by his finish as first in his age group.
Woo!
Nice work, Andrew. Sam ran a 5K and took second overall.
Nice, Sam.
Christy and Martha both ran in the relays that were happening.
Ragnar, right?
Ragnar. And I don't know exactly what teams are what and stuff, and have the hardest time figuring things out in these relays. There's so much craziness and fun. So lots of fun there. Great work, everybody, over the weekend.
Congrats.
And speaking of a great weekend and lots of fun,
a record-breaking
did anyone watch Berlin Marathon?
Berlin Marathon. Many claimed that this Berlin race had the perfect, ideal conditions. And with the amazing talent that showed up, it was not surprising that it was going to be a fast one.
Well, Kipchoge did say that he was going to be going for the world record again.
Yeah.
He didn't say a guarantee that he would go out on that pace in this race. But he basically did. And so it was no surprise to anyone when he went out fast. But he went out a lot faster than he needed to.
Exactly. It was really fast. He went out, his first half marathon was under an hour.
59 minutes and 50 seconds or something. So, yes. Now, here's what we just learned. We just learned that, one, little did we know, Elliot Kipchoge was going to see if he could break 2 hours in a legit race. Okay.
Yeah. So he decided partway through the race, though.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And so what we learned from that is, first, in this instance, with all the best possible conditions, he couldn't. That's interesting. Doesn't mean he can't, period.
Without pacers,
he was alone, solo, for basically the second half of the race.
Yeah.
So that's a bummer for him. But
that's not saying that. So what I'm hearing you say is that, perfect conditions, but that's not perfect.
What you're hearing me say is most people at this point now believe that he cannot run sub 2 in a legal race.
I don't know. I don't think that can't is a very nice word.
Well, and here's why.
Anything.
And I think this is a reasonable concern to raise. Published on Let's Run, they were writing about this. And they said,
if Let's Run says it.
It's not the message boards. It's their news sources.
Okay.
Published on Let's Run, they were giving the data on how old a runner has been when setting a marathon PR for the world's top 100 marathoners, okay? Top 100 marathoners for men and women. And in this instance, the oldest a marathoner's ever been for the men setting a PR is 38 years old.
But it only keeps creeping up as our healthcare has gotten better. We've learned more. Training has been more scientific.
Right. But the point
I think
here
that we're going to expand these numbers.
The point here is that if Elliot Kipchoge is going to still run another minute and 10 seconds faster, he has to defy more than human potential. He has to defy the likelihood of his own age potential as well. And that is another barrier. So the point here is simply, it is highly unlikely at this point based off of this. Now,
but his career has been highly unlikely.
Well,
so we're saying there's going to be a human who is going to win this many marathons.
You want to be so optimistic here.
I'm just saying.
Well, anyway,
he's going to be the man to prove them all
wrong. He ran
wrong.
2 hours and 1 minute and 9 seconds for a 30-second world record. He went out in under an hour for the first half, and so he lost a minute and change, not a lot, in the second half, which is really saying something. If you only lose a minute and change, he had company at halfway, and he ended up winning the race by almost 5 minutes. So he put 5 minutes plus on anyone else in the second half while he was slowing down. I love it.
That's a painful race for some of these guys.
Yeah, it is. So there you go. That's what Elliot Kipchoge does when he's wanting to just punish the race.
Yeah, and so he is now 69 seconds faster than the next human on the list.
Yeah.
That's a lot of space when you get down to world record times.
That's not, no, he's not 69 seconds faster. Because his time is 2:01:09, and the second fastest time
32
is
seconds.
41. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry. That was my bad. I was reading numbers wrong. Yeah, 32 seconds faster than the next human. Yep, so it was a great race. It was a fast race. And the guy who went out with him, Andamiak Bilihu from Ethiopia, he ended up in 2:06:40 for fourth place. So I'm sure that he was in the world of hurt. He had hurt locker going on.
He didn't pay for it that much, though, because he was only 42 seconds off of second place.
Yeah.
So you think about it. He went out in what was, I think, like a PR half marathon for him. Oh,
Another little fun fact. At 37 years, 324 days old, he is 216 days older than when Kenenisa Bekele set his 2:01:41 personal best back in Berlin in 2018.
Yeah. So he's the oldest to PR of the top 100 marathoners ever.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we are linking to the splits in case that's interesting.
Yeah, do you want to know what?
You?
How fast per 5K does somebody run to run this? Well, the answer is really fast.
4:37.2 per mile was the average pace.
That's 14:21 per 5K.
That is really fast. On the women's side, it was a surprise winner with a massive PR and breakthrough race, and that was Tigist Assefa, and she ran 2:15:37.
Wow.
In a course record time at Berlin.
Well, so is this the fourth or third fastest ever marathon?
You know what? If you want to look that up right now, you can.
It's one of those. Yep.
It was a course record, and her previous best was 2:34:01.
What?
Yeah, but that was her debut. Last March.
Yeah.
So, a lot of time has gone, or, it's her first time just figuring it out in March, and then
But this next point is the most interesting one.
She's an Olympian. She was
an Olympian in what?
2016 Rio Games in the 800.
In the 800 meters.
Yes, she clocked a sub 2.
And has never run a 1,500 or 5K or anything like that on the track.
Yeah,
she goes from 800 meter to marathon at one of the best of all time. So they started to look this kind of stuff up because this is what these people do, right? And they're like, okay, has anyone else ever been a world-class 800 runner and a world-class marathoner? And of course, the answer is yes. There's a Brazilian man, I think, who ran like 144, 145 in the 800. That's world-class. That's very fast. Who also ran like 2:12, which is... It's fast, but it's
really
not
fast.
world class. It's not going to even qualify you for the world championship. Yeah, but it's not even going to qualify you for the world championships
these days.
So, like, if that's the next best 800 marathon doubler, this is incredible.
Yeah. It is absolutely incredible, and it'll be exciting to see what she continues to do.
Yeah.
There are so many fast marathoners on the scene. I'm so excited for Helen Obiri's debut as well.
We're looking forward to this marathon circuit.
Exactly. There's so much going on. There were 4 women under 2:19. So that is
That's happened one other time in a race.
Yep.
One other time in London once. So like that's literally as much as the fastest women's marathon race ever.
Incredibly fast race. And Keira DAmato was the only one who had posted under 220
That's
in
right.
that race, I think, right?
Before that race,
I think she was
Keira DAmato was the only one.
Right.
Yeah.
And Keira DAmato was 6th, and she was the first American woman. And even though she didn't run her PR in Berlin, it's still the 10th fastest time by an American woman in history.
That's good.
So it wasn't slow for Keira DAmato. She ran a 2:21:48. So very respectable time, and 6th place finish at a world major is fantastic. She went out in 69.27, but she faded over the second half. So she went for it. She went out. Another notable performance, 40-year-old Natasha Woodick broke the Canadian record and ran
not the Canadian Masters record, but
right,
the Canadian record.
In 2:23.12.
Wow.
She's 40 years old. See, this whole conversation about age, I'm like, I think we're going to continue to push the bounds.
I'm not saying it's not
and push the
happening.
bounds. Yeah. And that only placed her 12th in the race, but it was a phenomenal group of women, and it was such a fast race that she was 12th, but with that Canadian record. So congratulations to Natasha.
True that. What a thing. What a thing.
What a thing.
So that was Berlin. We've got London, Chicago, New York. The marathon season is incredible, and we're looking forward to reporting on that here.
I want to know, for those of you who are connected with us, who watched it at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or wherever you were,
wherever
like
you
the middle
are.
of the night. I have a feeling there's a couple of friends that I think might have done it. I was like working a stressful job the next day, so I didn't watch it live at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I'm wondering if you did. So let me know if you did. You are hardcore, if that is the case. But we're going to move on to our next bit of news. Anna Dalton, previous podcast guest, won her first U.S. title at the U.S. Half Marathon Trail Championships. Now, you'll remember Anna Dalton, she lives in Alaska, and she gave us advice on how to run and train in adverse conditions.
Well, you got to have that when you're training in the tundra.
Well, it prepared her well, I guess, for these trails. So it's really exciting for her to level up in this way. So congrats to Anna Dalton. And now for a very different piece of news. And I just think
I don't know why so many people are talking about this.
Because it affects a lot of recreational marijuana users who might want to.
Are there a lot of recreational marijuana users?
It's on the rise, at least in Michigan, because it's legal here. So this is interesting. Marijuana stays on the doping banned list.
The World Anti-Doping Agency reinforced the marijuana ban.
And it was brought up because of Sha'Carri Richardson. Sha'Carri Richardson. She, that whole story where she tested positive. She was the best U.S. athlete at the track and field trials.
100 meters, yeah.
And the 100-meter run, but she was not taken as part of Team USA because she tested positive for THC, which is prohibited and it's banned. Yep. A few of the notes as the reason why: it's against the spirit of the sport, the agency said. And they also say that it really takes a high threshold level to register a positive for this specific test, which, this is a quote, is consistent with a significantly impaired athlete or a frequent user.
So the point is that they have long suggested that banning marijuana is in the best interest of athletics. And in this particular instance, that there's most countries participating in the anti-doping agencies already ban it countrywide. And so their suggestion here is it still maintains the goal of this is in the best interest for us, and it makes sense for the runners.
Right. And this is not like, an occasional thing. It's like like they said, significantly high threshold in order to register as a positive. And it doesn't count against you during in-season training. So if an athlete were to have random testing, they would not be penalized for having THC. This is only for competition.
In competition ban.
So
there's two layers of the doping stuff. There's the layer of like performance enhancement that's banned all the time, period. And there's the layer of like in contest. And there is a list of things specifically only banned in contest. And that matters because it suggests why they are trying to ban those particular things.
And the bans are short. They're only like a month. So that's also something of note. And Sha'Carri Richardson, her ban would have ended, and then that was the whole controversy too with her being taken as part of the relay team because her ban would be over before the relay. But they decided to not take her, to use another athlete. But that was part of the conversation as well. In a separate decision, the opiate Tramadol will be banned now, which is it's used as it's an opiate. So it's for pain. And cycling has outlawed it for starting in 2019. And the adverse side effects are dizziness, drowsiness, loss of attention, which may endanger other competitors. So that was a completely separate decision, but that is now on the banned list as well.
Well, speaking of things that are not banned,
Running. Keep running.
I was going to say your questions.
Your questions.
As you know, we are going to do this again with your questions at the end of the month. And so if you'd like to get on to the next one, submit a question at AtoZrunning.com/question, and we will answer those soon.
Yes.
And if you need support in other areas, if you'd like to pursue the potential of working with us in a coaching capacity, or you just want to hear more about how we can support you in your training, go to AtoZrunning.com and look for the word coaching.
One final note, if you see us out and about at races, or maybe at...
Don't talk to us.
Talk to us. Talk to me.
Do talk to us.
Do talk to us. It was so fun to meet a couple A to Z running listeners when I was in Detroit at the Detroit Auto Show. And thank you for coming up and saying hello. I was able to hear a really interesting story about someone who wanted to beat Oprah's time. There's all kinds of goals. I will have to go into that more at another time, but I think it was a really interesting story. It was really great to meet some other runners in a new city. So thank you all for your support of the A to Z Running Podcast, for listening. Please subscribe, rate the show, subscribe to our blog as well, where you can get free information to help you thrive as a runner. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.